Put the chunky one in the middle. Are there more than three? It's like a delicious sandwich.
Yes.
No, that wasn't me. No, I never went. Do you want some water? No, I've been in. I've been in Yuma. I think maybe that was it Julie Pastor?
No, 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 no. It was all legislators.
Oh no.
Wasn't it Tim
Oh,
Dunn?
I did not go down there on Tim's thing.
No, this was several years ago.
I
Yep.
we were on the
Yep.
I do remember that, yeah. I could have swore, I was, I even had no English.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Arizona Capital Times Morning Scoop on broadband and infrastructure. Broadband is an issue that's not typically highlighted in the state capitol. It's one of those things that we take for granted because most of us live in the great state of Maricopa County, and and internet access um, is just right there. We don't even think about it. My name is Luigi Del Puerto. I'm the associate publisher and editor of the Arizona Capital Times. Welcome and thank you for spending your morning with us. I want to take a moment to thank our sponsor this morning, the Center for the Future of Arizona. The center seeks to bring Arizonans together to build a bright future for our state. Its work has positively impacted more than 200,000 students across the state, more than 5,260 teachers across the state, more than 300 education leaders, 130 plus communities. And with us this morning is Dr. Sybil Francis. Dr. Francis is a founding member, president, and CEO of the Center for the Future of Arizona. She's a public policy architect committed to advancing innovative solutions to social imperatives. She oversees the center's strategic innovations, research, on partnership, and advances key initiatives that are at the core of the center's mission and work, including the Arizona We Want, the Arizona Progress Meters, civic health, and education and workforce innovation. Prior to moving to Arizona in 2002, Dr. Francis' public policy work focused on advancing the national science and technology enterprise. She began her career working in the U.S. House of Representatives and later served in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. She currently serves on several boards in the state, including the Nature Conservancy Arizona Chapter Board of Trustees, and is the chair of its Conservation and Public Policy Committee. She's a member of the Expect More Arizona Statewide Advisory Council, the Arizona Business and Education Coalition Board of Directors, and of course, in addition to numerous roles that she does for the center and outside of the center, she is also a key partner to her husband, ASU President Michael Crow, which some of you might know, in forging connections between the ASU and the community. Please welcome Dr. Sybil Francis.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Luigi. We're so thrilled to be partnering with you on this really, really important topic this morning and excited about the conversation ahead. I'd like to thank our elected leaders for participating in this, as well as our guests from Yuma and the ACA. As Luigi mentioned, we are committed to bringing Arizonans together to create a bright future for our state. It's as simple as that. We work statewide, and we drive an action-oriented agenda based on what matters most to Arizonans. You can take a look in your pamphlet and see that we do our work in several ways. One is we listen carefully to Arizonans about what matters most to them, and we report back to them how we're doing on those issues. And you can see our set of progress meters there that together comprise what we call the Arizona We Want. So we share trusted information about how we're doing across the state. We also bring communities together and equip them with that information and along with tools to help them identify what matters most to them and the kinds of actions they want to take in their communities. We are committed to systems change as well. So how do we change how we do things so we get better outcomes? Systems could include the education system. It could include infrastructure, including broadband. It can include our water policy. So we are very committed to all of those issues across the board. Our own work on the ground involves primarily education, workforce, and civic health. Luigi mentioned the impact that we've had in our education work. We are very interested in how can we design our education system for the outcomes that we want. So rather than doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome, how can we actually do things differently? We work with employers across the state. How do we create clear pathways from our education system into workforce? So we ask employers, what does a well-prepared employee look like, and how do we prepare those employees? In our civic engagement work, we do something called Democracy by Doing. We're working with schools in Arizona to help students experience the democratic process through something we call participatory budgeting. So we work across the state and across the board. We sometimes call ourselves a do tank to distinguish ourselves from a policy work, but we do everything A to Z, from policy to on the ground work. So we're actually thrilled to be partnering on this particular issue. I've had conversations with several of you in the room previously, and we sort of cooked up this idea for this morning and are really excited about that. I do want to acknowledge my colleagues, a subset of our army of staff who are fanned out across the state, working on all the projects that I mentioned. So with that, I will turn it back to Luigi and just say thank you, and take a look at our brochure if you want to learn a little more. Thank you, Luigi.
Thank you, Dr. Francis. By the way, we are live streaming this morning scoop, courtesy of our the audiovisual company that we work with, GSAV. So thanks to them for live streaming this one. The legislators on the panel remind what Dr. Francis said about doing the same thing all over again and expecting the same result, kind of like the legislature in the state capitol on certain days of the week, right? Want to introduce our panel this morning. Senator David Livingston, who represents Legislative District 22. Senator Livingston is the chairman of the Senate Transportation and Public Safety Committee. The cities have figured out, and the counties, cities and counties have figured out that if they want a bridge built, Senator Livingston is the guy to talk to. Thanks for being here.
You're welcome.
Julie Engel is the president and CEO of the Greater Yuma Economic Development Corporation, and in her tenure with the Greater Yuma Economic Development Corporation, she has been directly involved in the creation of over 4,000 new jobs, over 1 million square feet of new industrial space, and capital investment to the region that surpasses $1.5 billion. Julie, thanks for being here. Representative Becky Nutt represents Legislative District 14. She's a member of several committees, notably the House Natural Resources, Energy, and Water Committee. I hope you're surviving the crossover week, and thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Senator Lisa Otondo represents Legislative District 4. She is also a member of several committees, but also notably the Senate Transportation and Public Safety Committee. Senator Otondo, I hope you two are surviving crossover week. Thanks for being here.
Tough week.
And finally, we have Keith Watkins. Keith is a Senior Vice President of Rural Economic Development at the Arizona Commerce Authority. And in this capacity, Keith plays a vital role in advising the Commerce Authority and the Governor's Office on rural economic development issues and opportunities. That means if you don't get broadband because you live in a rural community, you know exactly who to blame.
Or who to call.
Or who to call. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being here, Keith.
Where's the door?
Thanks for being here. So Again, I mentioned that people in Maricopa County sort of take this issue for granted. I'll tell you a very short anecdote. My kid lost his physical book, and he needed to answer a couple questions because it wasn't due the next day, but it was due this week. And, well, what do? We have a Kindle at home. I downloaded it, and I bought the book and downloaded it. And between the time he said, I don't have the book, and the time he started reading the book again on his Kindle, it probably took like 4 minutes, something like 4 or 5 minutes. It was pretty quick. And I thought of it because we take that for granted, our ability to just get stuff, get information, download it, and it's pretty immediate. And so I want to ask, first of all, Julie, if you can talk to us about what you see is in the problem in your region, and tell us some anecdotes that bring this to the fore, sort of flesh this out, that illustrate how important it is and how unfortunate it is that there are parts of our state that still don't have broadband access.
Well, thank you very much for having me today, and it's an honor to be here. I mean, I could talk all day about some of the issues that we face, but I think one of the most critical issues we face is our proximity to Mexico. And Mexico doesn't use the same guidelines, the same frequencies, and so we have our Customs and Border Protection at our ports of entry, and they do not have the capability to even make a cell phone call from there because of the disruption with Mexico. We also have had instances where trucks will come in and we have USDA on site inspecting the produce that's coming from Mexico, and they might find an insect of some kind. They have to photograph that, bring it all the way to Yuma to process, go all the way back and verify, and in the meantime this perishable load is just sitting there while they're trying to do this. So this is just one example of the deficiency that happens right at the border. We have lots of gaps, and we are an agrarian culture. Agriculture is the majority of Yuma County, and they have technologies now that surpass some of the things that are in aircraft. We have drone technology that is actually using off-the-shelf chemical warfare type sensors that are looking for E. coli in the field and things like that. You have to have broadband to do these things, and we have so many gaps. We have tractors that are rendered useless in areas because there's no Wi-Fi, there's no way for them to use all the technology that is available to them. And when you think about the investment that went into that tractor and then to not be able to use those technologies is very, very frustrating. The cost that happens associated with that is very disappointing as well. But one of the things that was probably the most offensive is that our telecom providers charge us what they're charging you. We pay the same thing. Our cell towers were fed by T1 lines.
What is a T1 line?
A T1 is about 1.5 megabits. And that's all that was going to our cell towers. And yet we were paying for 4G, we're paying for all these services, and they did not have to make the investment. And their excuse was, we had to get Maricopa County done first, because that is where the majority of the people are. And so we're an afterthought. And this is just my county that I'm talking about. But those are 3 examples of the things where we're really suffering. I will say Verizon has stepped up. Spectrum, CenturyLink, not at all. And they also, technology is changing so fast, I can understand why they're reluctant to put some of the major infrastructure in, because they might not even be using that. It might be obsolete in 5 years. So I understand some of their dilemmas, but it's still not okay to have us in this situation. And here again, I go back to the one that I think is criminal, is we have students. We have been very successful in the funding and Makeway, is that what it's called, Keith? The Makeway funding that is getting infrastructure to schools and libraries?
Yes.
Okay, so we were able to access Makeway funding. So our schools have really good broadband, but when they get home, they don't. They would not be able to download a book like he did.
So they might be issued computers or laptops.
Exactly.
And then at home they can't really use it.
They
Let
can't
me-
use
let-
it.
Let me pull
Yeah,
in Keith
exactly.
here. So what's our situation statewide? Give us like a.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you, Luigi. My first question is, did you pay sales tax on your book purchase?
I hope
The correct
not.
answer is yes.
Getting the right answer.
I just about choked there.
That's a great question.
I think the answer is I hope not. No, I think I did pay the sales tax.
What Julie mentioned is a microcosm of what's happening around the state. You know, we have 15 counties in the state, 13 of which are considered rural. And then let's not forget the tribal areas. And so what's happening in Yuma is just a snapshot of what's happening around the state. Yuma is actually fortunate. They've got more than one feed. There's some communities that are vulnerable because they have only one line to their region. Payson comes to mind, Flagstaff comes to mind, and when those get cut, the entire region goes down. And that's everything from gas pumps to 911 responders. Payson has had their line severed at least 5 times within the last 4 years. And it's crippling. It's crippling. And what it comes down to is the rest of the world is advancing. Everything we do in our daily lives revolves around some sort of technology that all has to get back to the internet, that all has to get back to a data center somewhere. And when the rural communities don't have that same access as the urban areas, those communities are left behind, and the health, safety, and welfare of the people in the communities is in peril. And that's where I think government comes in, because that, after all, is the role of government, to ensure and protect the health, safety, and welfare of our citizenry. And so the state took a very hard look at what should our role be in this conversation. We very much appreciate and understand this is a free market economy that we're in. We respect that and agree with that. We don't want to disrupt that. Rather, the position that we take from the state's perspective with the governor's direction is to reduce the barriers for the carriers so that they can get service and redundancy out to these communities in a more affordable fashion. Any carrier will tell you they can get service anywhere, anytime. It's just a matter of how much do you want to pay. And so in order to keep it on par with the urban areas, there has to be something done to reduce those costs to entry, whether that's right-of-way purchases, state land permitting processes, which we've successfully solved, federal permitting issues. We're one of the few states that has the most preponderance of federally owned land in our rural areas. And so virtually any large infrastructure build is going to involve some form of federal permitting, which takes time, and time is money for private enterprises such as carriers. So whatever we can do to reduce those hurdles is going to inure to the benefit of the carrier and therefore the citizens.
Thank you, Keith. So let me ask Senator Otondo. Ma'am, how's broadband in your area?
Is this far enough away? Can you hear me? Okay, so my area.
You want to pull in the mic a little bit more?
Yeah, actually, let me
There
see.
you go, that's heavy.
Thank you. So my home is Yuma, and everything that Julie said is right on point. But my district is enormous. It's the second largest district. It encompasses Tucson and Tohono O'odham, which is the size of Connecticut. The tribal lands have really, I think, the most severe problem and have really been left behind. Ajo, half of Yuma County, so all along that border area that Julie was talking about, Somerton, San Luis, Gadsden, that's in my district. And then also Gila Bend and Buckeye and Goodyear. So, and Cocopah as well, another area that doesn't have access. So we've left our students behind. I was a teacher for 5.5 years, and this was more than 10 years ago. This was about 15 years ago. But even then, you see, Yuma went in, and about 31 of our schools, it was 31, right, Julie, that we were really an initiator in this, and we put the computer systems, the broadband in the schools. So our kids had access in the schools. But they cannot afford any internet at home. So homework, books, research, they've been left behind. And let's face it, the cost is completely prohibitive to their families. Completely. And as far as their families are concerned, think about the basics. Job applications, any sort of application potentially for a college. So they've been left behind, and the situation is dire. Even on a cell phone, I can be in downtown Yuma and not get reception.
Is that right?
Yes. In downtown Yuma, I can be on a phone and not get reception, and the minute I go over 5 blocks, I'll get reception, then I'll be over near 24th Street, it falls out, but when I'm on my way to South County, forget about it, it goes out. And there's parts over near San Luis, I just turn off because I will be making an international call. It picks it up as if I'm in Mexico.
So I guess
So-
I guess the trick is to put your office desk where there's
In your
reception and stay there.
Might be in the middle of the street, but.
Yeah, but I also really want to talk seriously about Tohono O'odham. So I think it was in 2010, there were some federal funds for fiber optics that were put there, and it was great. But now they've applied for another grant in 2019. They got it, and they're really working on it. But there are areas in Tohono O'odham that don't even have electricity. So think about how they've been left behind. But there are community anchors like Tohono O'odham Community College. But when the students go home, again, there's nothing. So,
Representative Nutt, ma'am, what about your experience? Can you tell us, how broadband is in your area?
Well, I would like to quote something from the proposed ruling from the Federal Communications Commission. In their introduction for that rulemaking, they began with broadband access is critical to economic opportunity, job creation, education, and civic engagement. And for communities throughout our nation to thrive and prosper, their residents must have the option to obtain high-speed internet access. So my driver in this whole thing, and I'm pretty new at this, and Keith knows how ignorant I am on this subject in a lot of areas, but I live rural. To Senator Otondo's point, we drive on spots where we lose service. Anyone in rural will tell you they lose service. You go around a corner, down a dip, wherever. And one of my districts, Cochise County, we go along the Mexico border, and yes, we have difficulty with cell service on that. To the point of the tribes, some tribes are doing their own communications. Some tribes don't want help with broadband, so that's another topic. Anything that we can do, the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund that has just come out, that is a huge opportunity for rural. I really look forward to expanding on that. I want to thank the co-ops for stepping up and allowing to use their infrastructure, and as they said, they got some permitting across the road. Mojave has really stepped even further and seeing the need in their community and is reaching out and being a provider. That's not a fit for all co-ops. We have 6 in the state, 5 are in my district. So that's not a fit for everyone, but they are working to try to provide. So any way that we can provide service in our, and where our government money can probably be best used is in these areas where we do have lack of service. But it's also that people can't pay. They want the service, some of them have access to the service, but they simply can't afford that. So how can we provide grants to have that? I go back to the history of electrifying the U.S., and this is a similar situation. The government stepped up to help that. We need to step up to help that. I'm not a government advocate, too much government, but there are things that we need to do. Government has allowed things to happen that has caused disparity, so let's make that an equal playing field.
Senator Livingston, you represent the great state of Maricopa County. After having heard what the problem is statewide, at least the broad the broad points, the broad framework, what the problem is. After having heard the problems in rural areas, I guess the question to you is that, do you agree that this is a statewide problem that then necessitates a statewide solution? Meaning to say, you and Representative Nutt and Senator Tondo and the governor's office, this is something that you have to intervene. And really the question is fund, right? I mean, it boils down to a certain extent funding.
Yeah. So, I'm the city guy here, and thank you for having me, because I am learning stuff, and I'm looking forward to it. It's interesting that, with Becky and Lisa, the two biggest districts in the state, and I'm up in Sun City West and Peoria, in a pretty confined district. So, yeah, broadband's critical, but everything we spend money on is critical. And everybody asks for more money. If it's the cities or pensions or fire districts or anybody, it doesn't really matter. Nobody says they have enough. So it's balancing priorities. It's balancing, 70% of the revenue comes in Maricopa County. How much of that should not stay in Maricopa County? Those are tough issues. I think where I agree the most, though, is along the border, especially down in Mexico, because trade is jobs, jobs is trades. And we are directly competing against Texas. So when you look at that, we need to spend the money and get the broadband down on the border, I think, more than I-17 heading north, for an example. I mean, I have a house in Prescott Valley, and I understand when I go up there, there's places I don't have service. But me having service isn't going to do much for the state. Yuma and the border cities will with trade. So my point of view is, wherever we invest money, I want to make money. Wherever we can get matching dollars to the federal, I want to get the matching dollars. And wherever we can partner with counties and cities and businesses to invest, and they're willing to invest, great. When it's 100% state money, that's where I usually say no.
So, Senator Tondo, I think you wanted to interject there.
Well,
Go ahead, ma'am.
I do want to interject, and I think that it is a priority, as well it should be, because we're leaving an entire portion of our community in the dark. So as Representative Nutt was saying, it is the difference between having a candle and electricity, but the difference is even greater. Because, for example, on Tohono O'odham, one of the citizens could begin to sell their crafts on the internet. They could have a home business. In the rural areas, the world is changing. People can work from home. People can have access to information that can change their lives at their fingertips. And you're leaving rural Arizona out. And there will be, really, it will come back in tenfold. It will have huge economic benefits for the state, for the localities, if they have access to broadband. Not to mention, you will have better grades in schools.
We hope.
Well, no, it's actually true. You will, because kids will have, better access to information. You can see now even online learning readily available here in the metro area. But what about the rural areas? What about online learning? What about those kids that are trying to go back and get their GEDs? And education changes lives. We know that. So everything from the economy to education to small business opportunities to applying for jobs, it is a huge swath of things that are extremely important for our economy. And
Julie, yes, sorry, go ahead.
I was really glad that Representative Nutt brought up the New Deal, the 1937 New Deal, where the feds really did step up and try and help with infrastructure. We have a serious problem at the federal level because the FCC has allocated millions and millions of dollars towards broadband. But if you have received federal funding for broadband, like the Make-Way, you're not eligible. You cannot go back to the till again. And the infrastructure that was put in for the Makeway is proprietary. They won't let anybody share it. So they can't even use the excess capacity for a telecom provider. So we've got to change some of the things at the federal level so that that money really is able to be used down where it's necessary and desperate.
What Julie's referred to is the E-rate. And as
This
we-
is the Department of Education program to provide broadband access to
That's
schools,
correct.
accelerate broadband
That's
access.
correct, and it
Yeah.
comes from federal dollars.
Yep.
And
With some matching state funds.
with some matching state funds. The trouble with E-rate is it's very much single purpose, strictly for schools and libraries. Never mind if it passes the urbanized area of Yuma or the business park or the subdivision. Sorry, you're out of luck, even though we're going right by you. We're going straight to the school or the library. That's short-sighted. The other thing with a lot of the federal grants is they're very restrictive. Communities under 20,000. Well, that's fine for communities under 20,000, but what about Flagstaff, or what about Yuma, who are over 20,000? Payson even is over 20,000. So for Arizona, these standards that get written in DC many times are very difficult to fit into our geography. But Senator Livingston, Senator, do I have that right, or Senator? It mentioned jobs, and you know, I have to say, I'm with the Commerce Authority. We're about economic development. We're about job growth in Arizona, and there's not a day goes by that the rural communities aren't harping on us to bring jobs to their communities, and it's a very hard proposition when we can't tell them with some assuredness that they have connectivity and redundant connectivity at that. So right away, the rural communities are starting out at a disadvantage. The other thing Senator Livingston mentioned, which I wholeheartedly agree with, is the state should not be the sole solution to these things. I think there's clearly a place, a role for the state to play. However, in the grant that we just did this prior year with one-time funding, it requires a match from the applicant, and we encourage leveraging other dollars, federal dollars, what have you, to make the money go farther. And so that's the spirit of the mechanics of what we're trying to do. I might also touch on the governor's Smart Highways initiative that's in his proposed budget. That proposes putting conduit along the major highway routes, I-17, I-40, and I-19. And that does a couple of things. Right away, that utilizes the existing right-of-way that is already there. And so it takes away that time element of a carrier having to go it on their own, having to go to each underlying landowner, negotiate a lease, and also the permitting issues. So there's time and money there that accelerates that. The second part is the state would install conduit, and then the state would lease that conduit to any carrier that wants to come into it. So it is a revenue producing thing for the state. But here's the kicker, because there's a lot of fiber in I-10, for instance, but there's going to be turnouts at every mile on these builds. That's going to go off to the communities, Black Canyon City, Camp Verde, et cetera, all along the way. So that's where it really will make a difference.
Representative Nunn. Yes, ma'am.
So, a couple things. The new Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, I think doesn't open the door to some of these things that Julie was talking about on the restrictions. I think that's covering some of those restrictions, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. So I think they're trying to overcome some of the things that happened in that first phase of the CAF thing. Also, just something that I think that we need to point out, and yes, I support what the governor's doing on this highway, But we have to remember that the government, no offense to our ACA, but because how they attract business is to where there's already infrastructure. So we kind of have a catch-22 in that we're not able to attract these businesses to the rurals that we're begging him to do so because we don't have this infrastructure. So if we can focus on some of these rural areas and with that infrastructure, then we can maybe help balance that out and on the long term, invest on the now so that we have that going forward.
And to that point, Luigi?
Yes, ma'am.
I do know that there has been a call on the federal level by one of our senators, by Sinema, to actually do broadband mapping. Because even the information of where the lines are needed, what the costs are, and to get the bigger picture of the state of Arizona, and not only Arizona, this is happening all over the United States. So what really needs to also be focused on is the bigger picture and the broadband mapping, which is important.
Senator Livingston, sir, you mentioned that you mentioned your hesitancy to provide or basically have the state be the sort of the lead entity or player in providing broadband access statewide. You mentioned that you are amenable to providing funding for broadband access in areas where you can certainly see a rate of return, for example, at the border with Mexico. If we have a great broadband access, that facility is straight. So there are two funding proposals made with the government. One is $60 million for the smart highways, and then the second one is another $10 million grant. I think that will go to the Commerce Authority, and then Commerce Authority will provide that grant to communities. Where are you at on those two proposals right now?
Great question. On the smart highway, the 60 million, I'm not convinced that's the way to go. I need to be convinced still. Frankly, disappointingly, I have not been briefed on any details on that, even though I'm Senate Transportation. And I know on your side, you know, your think tank is do it. David's think tank, get it done, fix it. And I fix it. And my hands are in the budget, and the hands are in a lot of things, and I haven't received a detailed briefing at all.
So
I
after
learned
this-
more
yeah.
just in the last 5 minutes than anyone's told me all session.
We'll get on your calendar.
Well, that's fine.
You're gonna
But
get a
it comes
briefing.
Like
down.
right after this
That's
meeting.
okay. But so you have $60-70 million there. I have 5 bills for transportation that's $150 million. And I'm weighing those. And those bills have passed out of approps, and they've passed out of my committee, and now we're gonna be sending them over to the House. So we've had some detailed stuff, we've had discussions, and we've gone through that, and we got the votes to do those things. So it's a priority thing, and it comes down to 16, 31, and 1, and you have to have it all.
So I guess we need another morning scoop, so just so they can brief you about 60 million smart highways funding and then.
Most of the lobbyists that are in the audience and people watching, I do a lot of meetings. I do a lot of meetings, and and every bill and every issue, I try to look at it as a coin. It's two-sided and they're different, and you have to be able to understand both sides of the coin before you make a decision.
So are you open to changing your mind? Are you persuadable at
I
this point?
think so. I think the 2 other elected officials here could tell you better than me. But I'm open to meetings and having discussions and making good decisions. And looking at things from a short-term point of view, I usually throw away. I'm a long-term planner. So, you know, when we get back to the governor's proposal, I don't know how 5G falls into that. Do we need to have all this stuff, cable on the ground, or do we need to have better satellite communications and do it all that way?
Well, the proposals, they're not really liking the satellite that the president has come out with in this Rural Digital Opportunity Fund and the CAF. That's not their priority, satellite, which I like, John.
It doesn't, even though it's a president I like, it doesn't mean it's a federal government that I trust.
So, so you can be persuaded. You're not yet convinced. You're gonna have a meeting with Keith, like right after the morning school.
And Luigi, can I
Yes.
just say something?
Yes, go ahead, ma'am.
I work with Senator Livingston. We sit on, we've been
A
working,
couple.
we sit on transportation together and appropriations. And I have to say, he is always open to speaking not only to me, but to my colleagues. And sometimes, that conversation is not as fluid, but I have to say, I respect him very much because he comes to me and I can go to him. We're working on a
you.
couple things now, so.
Just real quick, yes, sir.
I want to interject one thing. The carriers are very much an important part of this conversation. And we have gone to great lengths to engage the carriers and keep them at the table and keep them as part of the solution. And so we are not doing this in a vacuum. This is not a surprise to them. They're supportive of what we're doing.
So, Julie, I want to ask you, ma'am, if Senator Livingston is hesitant at this point, I can imagine that there are other members of your caucus that are probably just as hesitant as you are, and they look at the budget and they say, look, we only have $1 billion in surplus money, so what are we going to do with that? Something like that.
An extra 75 just from January.
An extra, so 1.75 billion in surplus money. Where do we spend that money? But I'm being flippant there. Yes, I guess the question is, Julie, what do you say to Senator Livingston and other members of the legislature who may be hesitant, who may look at this proposal and say, I'm with you here, but there's Tonto Bridge that we probably need to fund. There are other more immediate needs that we need to fund. And so broadband maybe can wait.
Well, I appreciate the fact that he's willing to have meetings and everything, but I heard a speaker one time say, you can't legislate from a distance. So unless you get out there and really experience what the issues are, you really can't make a decision on those issues. And I really do think that they need to rely on their partners who are in those rural areas to provide them with the actual information. And the decisions can't be made from their own scope of reference. And it concerns me because there is a very different attitude for the haves and the have-nots. And if you are living in an area that has all these services, it's easy to kind of kick the can down the road for the areas that don't. But I can't agree more with my fellow colleagues here that this is an emergency. And this can't be delayed any longer because we are holding back a segment of our economy, a segment of our population and demographic. And I will say the majority of those are minorities. And so it cannot be delayed anymore.
So I guess what I'm hearing is that meeting with Keith after the morning scoop and Senator Livingston, and then a tour in Yuma. And then,
So Luigi.
And I've done that before.
There's areas
I-
much worse than
Yeah,
Yuma.
I've been to the city council down there. We had a pension meeting a few years ago that I went down to and spoke. So I do that, and I'm willing to do that.
Luigi, if I
yes,
could just interrupt,
go ahead,
we
ma'am.
need to remember that this is about an economy also, not only about people's lives and quality of life, but it's also about our economy. Julie talks about the border and the infrastructure of the farmers. This is a huge, agriculture in Arizona is over a $23 billion industry, and Yuma is a huge part to that. How can we kick that can down the road and not pay attention to that?
And Luigi, excuse me, I'm sorry, and we haven't even talked about telemedicine.
Yeah.
I mean, there's still
Thank you.
another whole aspect of this. So it's not only the economy, it's health.
So you're talking about, in fact, you're talking about the economy, you're talking about health, you're talking about public safety, and those are just three major areas that broadband can certainly help. Let me pivot a little bit into some of the successes that you have seen in your respective areas as a result of having broadband. Now, I know the schools, for example, have been getting broadband. There's, I think, last time I checked, there's about $128 million, maybe more now, $160 million, something like that, that's come to the schools as a result of E-rate. Now, that's funding that's from the federal government with matching funds. And I think the Corporation Commission kicked in another $8 million, and the state kicked in some money. And so there's a pool of funding for the schools, and of course, it's specifically geared toward the schools. And I get that to a certain level. You want to fix a specific problem, that's how you do it. But talk to us, let me ask Keith, talk to us about some of the successes that you've seen in rural communities when they have broadband.
Well, there's some communities and carriers that are quite enterprising, and when they do these E-rate builds, they put an extra conduit in the trench for that.
Explain that to them.
So the E-rate rules say that you have to have dedicated conduit and dedicated fiber to the school and the library. But it doesn't say you can't put an additional conduit and additional fiber in there to serve other uses. And so the carriers that choose to do so and see a future consumer or a customer base do that. And so that's occurred in some places. St. John's comes to mind. They've done that. And that's a far eastern Arizona community that really has two sources of or two bases of their economy, agriculture and the power plant. And the power plant is in question. So that's important, and it allows people to telecommute and to do various things from their home computer where they don't have to be at an office every day, but they can work for somebody in Omaha coding medical billing records, for instance. So it is a piece of economic development from that respect. From the other respect, even distribution centers are automated today. Bullhead City, we just helped land a large distribution center up there a year or two ago named Dot Foods.
What is a distribution center?
A distribution center is a place that takes in bulk packaging, packages of goods, breaks them down into smaller packages and delivers them out to the end user. We have a plethora of them here in the Phoenix area, and there's several others scattered throughout the state, Tucson, Yuma, and now Bullhead City. Well, they're all automated these days with barcoding and SKUs and all those sorts of things, and they have robots and automated pickers that go and pick the order and load the truck. So those things are all automated, and they go back to a central office wherever their headquarters is, and without that, they can't operate. And so it really does get back to economic development as far as the Commerce Authority is concerned, but it has so many other societal benefits that we've come to rely on here in the urban area that we take for granted almost every day. There are even state offices in rural Arizona that cannot process payroll online. They have to physically send it by U.S. mail. And so you talk about efficiencies in government, that's not it.
So,
Senator Livingston.
thank
go
you.
ahead, sir.
So, economic development's great. The term I like to see is return on equity, return
No
on
doubt,
investment.
No doubt.
So if we're talking Yuma or St. John's or Bullhead City, and we increase economic development, 10%, 15%, 20%, it's a huge deal for those areas. But if I'm down here in Maricopa and I increase it 1%, which one's greater effect on the state overall from a sales point of view, from tax, from sales transactions? My 1% wins. So and you have to balance that. You have to analyze that. You have to make decisions based on
And the
that.
costs involved.
So I
Zach deserve a boo.
I didn't say it.
yes.
Have you ever seen me in water committee?
I'm happy with
starting
this.
to get that same hair
Thank
up
you
on the
for
back of my
saving me.
neck.
on your side.
I know that.
I have a seat, Senator Tondo, just over there, not long enough to reach. Something like that. But so just real quick, it reminded me what the economist Ilya Pollock would say every single year when he gives his economic briefing. And he says, well, if you look at all the economic growth in the state, it's like they're like 85% or 90% are in Maricopa County.
Right.
And then he would say each time, the rest of the 14 counties can disappear and nobody would notice them in weeks. And it goes to your point, a 1% growth in Maricopa County sort of lifts the entire state, but not really. So let me ask Senator Tondo, because you're ready to fight.
Yeah, I am. You brought out the Basque in me. You know, I will tell you, you may talk about the immediate return, but your long-term losses will cost you more. Your losses in education, your losses in health, your losses in new business, your losses in home, your losses with agriculture, with everything that's happening on the border.
Public
with
safety.
Public safety. Your losses in the long run will cost you more. And listen, if this were cheap, believe me, the private sector would be in there, putting in that infrastructure, and would be on the road. But the returns are slower. The infrastructure is costly. You've got to go in and do it, make it affordable, and then in the long run, it comes back. But that investment is crucial for the rural areas and a huge portion of our state. So,
Well, I would argue that the only reason that we have the West is because we electrified the rurals, and we, excuse me, we are in Arizona because of that move back in the 40s.
But to Senator Livingston's point, I totally agree. Return on investment, it should be considered when making such things. However, it's very hard to quantify. It's very hard to say W.L. Gore and Flagstaff added another 1,000 jobs because we ran another strand of fiber up there. It's really hard to equate the two. And but I could tell you, if internet wasn't, or the broadband wasn't available to Flagstaff, W.L. Gore wouldn't be there.
So there's $60 million
And
$60
you
million
wouldn't be
that
as
the governor's
successful.
office is asking for the smart highways. So to Senator Livingston's point, how do you, and I think you mentioned, how do you quantify the return on equity, return on investment on a huge investment like that?
It's very hard to do when you're talking something about something that is so foundational to everyday life and everyday business. I mean, it's almost like saying we need more air, and you have more air. Well, how do you? I mean, how do you quantify that? Because you have more air, you added 10 jobs. It's just almost impossible to do. But one thing's for sure, it's a public necessity.
And I know how you get David on our page. You tell him, it is a bridge, and it is a road. It is a road, and it is a bridge.
So, but
Go ahead,
to that point,
It's 2 in 1.
so to that point, one of my bills, 1155, is part of the Broadway curve that they're going to be starting this year. And they've asked for ADOT's #1 priority, MEG's #1 priority. They've asked for $30 million. My bill does that. That project is $750 million total, and it will be built in the next 4 years. Think of the amount of jobs, and a lot of that's federal dollars. Think about the money, the jobs, the sales taxes of that project.
There's a difference
You
between.
can't compare that to any other project in the state.
But
It
there's a
wins.
difference between temporary jobs and permanent jobs. And
That's
then
why we
when
need
we're
to keep
talking
building
about
these things.
broadband, that will help with permanent jobs. And I like to say we're only as strong as our weakest link. And if our rural communities in the state are weak, it leaves our state susceptible to weakness.
It absolutely does. And you need us. You don't realize it, but you absolutely do because of the infrastructure that is leading to you and the goods that are coming out of our areas to you, especially food.
Yep.
And so I really think it is too short-sighted. We used to be able to set a strategic plan in motion that had a 20-year, 30-year outcome. Nobody wants to do that anymore because they want that immediate gratification. They want to be able to say, I did that. And we've lost those long-term goals that are going to sustain our economy. And
Why do
I
you
ju-
think we've lost them?
Because of the immediate gratification. Everybody, like you just said,
society
that
is-
1% is immediate, and it is so much more profound than making an investment in rural Arizona that you might not see a return on for 10 years. Nobody wants to do that anymore.
From the capital point of view, I disagree with you. I think that one of the biggest problem is we lose 1/3 of our 90 members every 2 years. And we lose institution knowledge, we lose leadership there, we leave planning there because we're turning over the members so much. And I'm 55 and I'm one of the old guys.
But we can change that by training people to come after us. Consider it a service. We're serving our state, we're serving our nation. Why shouldn't we be looking out there for people to come after us and help train them while we're still in office?
So, okay, we're almost out of time, and I think one of the questions asked is why do people go for instant gratification? And I think the answer to that mostly is sugar, right? I mean, a lot of it happens because if it is immediate, your brain's activated, and when your brain's activated, you kind of get addicted to the high. And I think that's and to Senator Livingston's point, I have seen the state legislature lose institutional knowledge with term limits. And I'm a reporter, so I can't really say if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but you can judge for yourself where we're at compared to the time when we had term limits. So, I want to bring in the audience if you have questions. Sure. I think we have room for one. Uh-oh. I'm sorry, not him. Somebody. Rusty, go ahead, sir.
Thank you.
You want to use the mic?
If you want me to.
Yeah, sorry.
I am loud enough, I think, as it is. So I'm Russell Smolden, and in all fairness, I represent Mojave Electric Cooperative and Grand Canyon Electric Cooperatives. I also represent the Arizona Municipal Power Users, which is irrigation districts, electrical districts, those folks, city-owned electric systems. So here's the opportunity. I love the first mile that we're talking about building, but unless you have somebody to build the middle mile, you're still stuck with the first mile, right? It doesn't go anywhere. So we have an opportunity, Senate Bill 1460, which is Senator Borelli's bill, that will allow Mojave Electric and the electric co-ops who decide to get into the business to build that middle mile. That middle mile then connects to the individual retail customers who will take the broadband, schools, hospitals, everybody. So in Mojave County, in Bullhead City, where that service territory is, there is a little pocket of cable in the middle of Bullhead. But if you go from Wiki up to the Grand Canyon, up to Peach Springs, there is nothing. So this would allow us to build that. It costs $110 million. That's what our request is at the commission in order to be able to do that. And we can make it work because we already have the infrastructure in place and the easements and the pole attachments. We need some help on liability issues associated with those easements, and we need to be able to make sure that we can create an affiliate that then separates the electric costs from the broadband costs. So we're willing to do that. Our bill right now is held up because the cable companies are nervous about pole attachments and cross-subsidization and other stuff that really shouldn't matter in the scheme of things. So we are fortunate in Mojave that we have the first mile comes from Phoenix to Vegas, connect, there's a booster at Davis Dam, right? So that gives us the opportunity to do that. We need to look for those types of opportunities where we can build middle mile. And it may be on public systems. It may be EDs, it may be the IDs, but those are the things we got to concentrate on.
I'm sorry, Russell.
Thank you for the question,
Can
Rusty.
you repeat that bill number again for me?
1460.
1460.
Yeah, yeah.
Gotcha.
I'm sorry. Thank you for the question, Russell.
Statement.
I think we.
Lobbyist and ability to lobby, brother.
I think we only have room for one, so I'm sorry. Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, John Kelly with lots of clients that care about this. But Keith made 2 points that I think are really important and which will lead to a question, I promise. Proprietary and public safety, because in addition to the $60 million in the budget, there's about $40 million in the governor's proposal for DPS to build out what's called the Northern Loop, which is for a radio system, but it's microwave to backhaul into the middle mile that Russell was talking about. But public safety builds their own towers. They lay their own conduit because it's public safety and they're special. So I just think there needs to be an effort. I know the broadband office may be involved in this, and it's an opportunity for you, Senator Livingston, because your committee is transportation and public safety, to bring those two entities together to see how those two investments can support each other.
They
So
haven't come talk to me about that
we may
60 million either.
we may be able to spend less than the 40 million in order to build that out, but there's nobody that bridges those combinations. So I was going to say, has anybody talked to you? Is there any opportunity within the legislative process to get the agencies that have these demands to process payroll, to serve the public, to deliver healthcare, to deliver education, to look at what their needs are and see if those conduits can serve their needs together as opposed to separately.
So that's one of my biggest frustrations. This is my 8th year down here. And it's that the government agencies are not working together for the big state projects. And we're not having, on the government side, master committees, as I would call them, with the chambers, with the business owners, and with the directors of these agencies together working on that. Why does DPS do their own towers? It makes no sense to me. Why don't we, say, okay, we're building these towers and everybody's gonna have a share of them and everybody's kicking in, now go sell as much as you can.
Thank you, Senator Livingston. We have one online question, and maybe it's it's something that Keith can answer. We have an online question. The question is, what's the marginal utility between a 4G and a 5G? So what's I guess if I'm understanding this correctly, what's the difference? What does 5G give that 4G does not?
I'm not smart enough to answer that. Alls I know is that 4G is the 4th generation of the technology. 5G is the 5th generation. But I will say that it all has to come back to, as John mentioned, a backhaul to a data center. Senator Livingston mentioned satellite and so forth. That's all fine and good, but it still has to come back to a fiber somewhere. And every tower you see has fiber to it. So the fiber has to get there first before you can get wireless. So that gets lost on a lot of folks. But the other piece of that is because we have such a diverse geography in our state, there is no one-size-fits-all technology that's best. And so as a state, we remain agnostic in terms of what technology is most appropriate for what particular area. But fiber is the backbone. It's the first mile, the middle mile, and then that last mile could be the satellite, the microwave, the what have you.
Thank you so much for our panel members. We are out of time, and I promised everybody we'll be done by 8:30 in the morning. So once again, I want to thank our sponsor, the Center for the Future of Arizona. Dr. Francis, thank you for engaging with us, and I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. I want to thank our audiovisual company, Phoenix Tech, for live streaming this morning scoop. And I guess my takeaway is that the conversation continues. And you're going to have to persuade Senator Livingston at some point.
The value of rule.
And let me know once you do that so we can write about it in the Arizona Times.
I would give you a scoop.
Perfect. Thank you again, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank